I was so anti-sales back then because they used to, what drove me nuts is they'd be walking by. Like I'm a draftsman and we're just sketching something up on the screen. You know, my boss.
So if you feel like your product or service is taking someone's money, you got to look into that first of all, right? Because you should be providing a rock solid.
Just finding a job or getting a promotion doesn't even have to be a business situation, right? It's just sales. It's just, you're not going to regret understanding how to do it. So that's all right. We're live. This is experiment number 2, where Mike and I here are going to just, ramble about topics every week that we think are fun to talk about. This week, we're going to talk about sales and marketing and the stigma that's been attached to it and the negative stigma that's been attached to it by, like Gen X people, 50 plusers, that kind of thing. But first, before we start, I'm going to let Mike Buccialia, like he's going to introduce himself and do a better job of saying his name. And then I'll tell you who I am. So
thanks, Corey. I'm Mike Buccialia. I am the owner and founder of MindWorks. MindWorks is a coaching program that's really about self-discovery, getting to the root of what is causing you stress, which is often a fractured mind that's trying to do 20 things at once across life and work and business. And ultimately, what we're going to talk about today is realizing like where we have these deep hidden beliefs about ourselves or the world that we can update to make it less stressful because things are changing at a rapid pace and we got to change with it.
All right. Yeah. And I'm Corey and I have a blog and soon, if you're watching this, a YouTube channel. Basically, I call it Redefining Retirement. And what that's about is just me talking to other people like me, like Gen X people, and helping us understand that we don't necessarily have to have this magical end of the road called retirement. We can find something that we like to do today that we just want to continue doing for the rest of our life. And there's a whole spiel about it. You can see it either at the blog or in the YouTube description. So anyway, today we're talking about sales and marketing and the stigma attached to it. And the reason this came up is because last week when we talked, I had mentioned that I kind of had an unlock with sales in my career. Like, it was a point after I had went self-employed for a while. I went through a dip in my business, had to take some part-time jobs. And then I saw your eyes light up. And then we started talking about like, oh my God, that'd be a great topic. So that's what we're going to talk about.
And Corey, you know what? Just before we dive in, let's remember to come back to that dip you had and the taking the part-time jobs, because I think this is an overarching theme too of like how we just need to be resilient when we want to pursue a dream or go build a business, that there's going to be setbacks and sometimes we're going to have to make sacrifices or changes and adapt. And so like that period where you're like, I got to find, a stepping stone. Because often I've seen a lot of people, and it's happened to me too, get caught up where we're at and just trying to work and grind through this thing where it's like, I need to sidetrack for a minute to get me back on my path. So that's going to be a cool part of the story too. Let's not forget to dip into that.
Yeah, that's a huge one. It's kind of the, like when they talk about like in LA, like everybody that is a waitress or a waiter is a actor or or something, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They obviously look at themselves. They want to be an actor. That's the dream, but they realize that they have to, have money too, right? And that's kind of the same thing, really with anybody.
Yes.
And I think I did a post on this recently. Well, not recently. Everything seems to be recently me these days, but it was about like what we can learn from musicians. As far as as far as like how we should think of how we should approach work, because you have to be disciplined in so many different things, right? Like, you got to do promotion, you got to write the songs, you got to, at least when you're starting out, unless you're just lucky, and you have like this whole ecosystem built around you. But there's just a lot of things you have to do, right? You have to be good at sales. You have to be good at marketing. You have to be good at all this stuff because you're promoting yourself and your music, at least if you want to go somewhere. And then you might have to have like a day job,
But if it's all towards like, if you're very clear on who you want to be, the things you want to be doing, and that is, a milestone or a step towards it. It's when we get distracted and we give up and we go, well, I'm just going to go get this job and I'm going to just stay in this job that feels safe because, I'm disheartened or discouraged or whatever on this other path. That's the key difference, right? It's like, it's fine to do whatever you need to do. If it's one way or another sustaining you towards getting to this goal, it's when we totally deviate and give up on our goal or a dream. That's the real problem. But to sidestep and go make some money to help fuel it one way or another, or just take care of yourself or whatever it is, like that's part of the journey, right? And I also think if we get too beholden to like, I can only do it and I can only do it this way, which means like you're struggling and suffering, through paycheck to paycheck or whatever, when you don't have to be. If you could find a part-time job that's not going to, totally distract you and kind of give you a little income cushion, that's fantastic,
Yeah, and I'm sure we're gonna come around to this again, but just kind of thinking like, what is it that made us so skeptical? I'm kind of going through my own mind of all the years. Like we've got like late night infomercials. We got the crazy car guy on when we only had 3 channels. The local TV commercial, like MLMs, network marketing stuff. Like I don't want to say brand names. I don't want to get myself into trouble, but rhymes with Flamway. Like, I don't
Good
know.
job.
So, all that stuff rolled into one. And I think just Gen X, we've seen it all because we were the ones that had the fire hose aimed at us with like advertising, especially when you start to see cable come online in the 80s, and you've got MTV, you've got all these different channels, and we're just being sold to constantly. The other thing I remember is like just how credit cards like just started showing up in the mail. I mean, that's not necessarily sales, but it is marketing, right? And you're just bombarded with all this messaging. And I think that made us super cynical. And it kind of gave us this whole, that's kind of why we have this negative, what am I looking for? Stigma with everything sales. And, actually you were a salesman, right? Weren't you in your past life?
So 20 years in sales. Yeah. I mean, I was like corporately trained in enterprise sales. So I was selling business to business, worked at software companies. So I worked at large software companies. I would sell to other large companies, right? Which I learned a lot about the art and science. There was a lot of data involved in that type of sale, right? But there's a lot of psychology in it, and I feel, and a lot of finance in it. So you're learning business, you're learning the sale, you're learning to work with people. In larger, more complex sales, it's a lot about stakeholder management and kind of navigating project managing. But nonetheless, you have to do 2 things, which is get comfortable with rejection, because you're going to get people either denying the claim you're making or denying some feature or some sellable aspect of what you're trying to promote, and they're going to be hesitant and just challenge it. You're going to also just get straight up, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to like hear about your product. I don't want to go further in this, conversation, whatever. And then the other thing you got to do is get comfortable talking about money. You got to go, well, this, in my case, the things I was selling was millions of dollars. You got to go. I mean, there's also a little bit. So I'll say that, right? So that was I learned finance, I learned communication, I learned psychology, like how people think, what motivates them around decisions, what scares them and pulls them back. I learned to develop some thick skin around rejection and, kind of keeping some distance from that. And I learned to comfortably talk about money. So those were all great. But I think when it comes to being an entrepreneur, especially if your product or service is related directly to yourself, and you're working one-on-one with other people, it's a bit different because you know that you're working with them on their finances, their money. When I would make $1 million pitches, it phases some people. It just naturally didn't phase me because I was like, whatever, it's this company's money. So like I already had some sort of dissociation in my mind about it, but I talk to are like feel apprehensive about charging, a high amount or whatever it is, because it's like they feel like they're taking their money, and that's a big thing. So if you feel like your product or service is taking someone's money, you got to look into that first of all, right? Because you should be providing a rock solid value and benefit and feel confident about that. And it's okay if you don't, but that's one of the first things I'd look at, right?
That right there was a huge key for me. Like when I first started even entertaining the thought of sales and marketing and all that stuff. And just to give you some background, when I worked at a place called Winona Lighting. It was a custom architectural lighting. I don't have to get into that, but they sold through sales distributor, like salesmen, like
Mm-hmm.
all over the country. And I used to have to work with them both because I was in the new product development and just working a lot. And then I eventually was in estimating. So I was talking to sales guys like all the time. And the company, or the owners of the company, were like great salesmen. And I really did not like salesmen. I was so anti-sales back then because they used to, what drove me nuts is they'd be walking by. Like I'm a draftsman and we're just sketching something up on the screen. You know, my boss gave me something like, oh, here, let's try this and try that. And they'd walk by and they'd be like, oh, what's that? And I'm like, I learned to be like, nothing, walk away because
Well,
it's
wait,
enough
so
for you
tell
to
me
just
more
be
about it.
nothing.
How did you get conditioned to say
Well,
nothing? Like,
because what they would do is they would go, and I understand this now, but they'd be in a customer's office next week. You're always looking for stuff, right? They love it when
yeah,
you get a new catalog or a new
yeah,
brochure. They love something. They always want to have a reason to go visit a client or a customer. And so they'd be talking to people like, well, hey, I just saw something the other day, like, and it's just like, and then they would sell it and then it would come through and it's like, whoa, we can't make that. Like that was like
gotcha,
hypothetical. We don't even know if,
gotcha.
if we can get tooling for it, all this stuff. And when I was in the estimating department, which was a little later in my time when I was there, I helped quote their projects. So
Uh-huh.
I saw when they were overselling stuff, but I also saw these huge markups that they put on everything. And it was just insane, right? Like we're talking like million dollar projects and they'd put like a 50% freaking, on the top just for them.
Yes.
It wasn't for the
Yeah.
company. It wasn't for anybody else. So I just had
Okay, good. So so you're already getting to some important stuff here, Corey. So
yep.
you asked like, where does this stigma come from? And you already mentioned the absolute quintessence. Whenever, like, what is the first thing that comes to mind whenever someone says like, oh, I don't want to be pushy. I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to be a used car salesman. It's always car. It's so interesting. That is like, I've never heard any other example other than like a used car salesman, right? So that's top of mind. But then you have that experience, right? And there's two things there. It's like, oh man, you're overzealous. You're out selling something we can't deliver on, or we haven't figured out how to deliver on yet. And then there's that kind of selfish markup. So markups are fine. We need to make profit. We need to be able to reinvest in our products and services. So we maybe need to talk about profit and markup and margins and stuff, but that's more pricing than sales, but
Yeah.
nonetheless. But what those examples, and you mentioned infomercials, all these things that come right to mind of like why we typically hate sales and find it sleazy or scammy or whatever, multi-level marketing, right? Here's the ultimate thing is like our mind tends to fixate on what's wrong so that we can be aware of it and avoid it, right? It's a natural thing. Like it goes primal, right? It's like, I could focus on the pretty butterfly or you're like, oh, there's a snake down there, right? It's like, it's that simple. And so we go, oh, this type of salesperson has a bad reputation. I've had this bad experience. I've seen where they've been selfish. They mark things up. So your mind's now like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that kind of person. I want to be a good person. However we view that, right? And so you're going to be at odds with yourself on that. I'll finish this by saying though, the way to work with that is to acknowledge it, understand that like, oh, I'm like relating to this. But then it's like, okay, then I just won't be that way, right? Like I won't do a markup so that I can profit for my own profit's sake. If it's profit for the, good of the company and the product and reinvestment and all that, great. But if you're literally just being selfish, then you have to live with that. And if you can live with that, fine. I can't. I'm guessing you can't. So then we just don't do it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, and where I was going with like when I started turning the corner on this is it had to do with when I was working like in network marketing and MLM and all that kind of stuff, right? Because they're like, go find, all your friends and family and beat them over the head with with this product. And I learned over the course of that period, there was one major problem with me in those types of businesses is I did not believe in them at a deeper level. That was step one, right? And I know there's a lot of people out there. I got friends that can sell you anything. I mean, they're great at it. They're natural. They don't have to believe in it. But for me, I always had to know and I had to understand it. I have to believe in it. Otherwise, I do feel I start to get a little, icky. You know what I mean? I don't feel right. So that's when I started my evolution. So fast forward a couple of years after I kind of went through that phase. And I was, let's fast forward 10 years from that point when I had my epiphany about sales in general. And basically, I ended up having to take a part-time job at a RV dealership because my business at the time, I lost a couple big clients. I learned an important lesson about having more clients than just, exactly what you need, and always kind of keep the pipeline full. So I took this RV dealership and I hung out with sales guys every single day. And these guys are like, these dudes are on the floor every single day, shaking and baking, talking. And I just heard how they were talking to them. But I also would interview each one of these guys. Like I was the internet guy. So I was just there to learn. That was part of the deal. I'm like, hey, I'll run your website, but I want to learn sales. So I'll gladly work for commission, as kind of like a trade-off. I mean, I did get like a small salary.
So smart.
So I'm like, oh, by the way, I see that you don't have Google Ads either. Why don't I just do that for you? And then you guys just show me how to do sales. Well, so I worked there for 9 months, got jacked a couple times, got screwed over a couple times. But before that started bothering me about getting sales stolen from me and all this stuff, it clicked in me. I'm like, you know what? I learned that if I can sell a camper or a boat, and I don't know anything about these things other than the fact that we camped a lot. That's all I know. I don't know anything. I'm not like a gearhead type of guy or so I didn't know the mechanical stuff. And I can't tell you how many BTUs were in the furnace and all this other stuff. But what I did know is that, hey, Bill, check out this camper here. I mean, just look at this. You press this button and it levels itself out. You can be having a beer while you're doing that. And the wife, and then, you know what I mean? I started just telling stories around everything. Right. And that's really all marketing and sales is stories. But the big things that I learned when I was doing sales that I learned from, first of all, one of them was one of the big sales guys there, one of the best ones. He was telling me, he goes, you know what I do that none of these other guys do? And he's pointing at all the young guys. He's like, I get on the phone every single day, 50 to 100 times a day, even in the middle of the winter when nobody's buying campers. And he goes, and I call people and I talk to them. And he goes, that's how I keep my pipeline full. And to me, it was like, ding, ding, ding. Even though he was successful, he had to continue, putting in the time and putting in the work. He also
was so much benefit to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was also the guy that I'd be showing a camper and he'd be sitting in there with a couple and maybe even a family. And they're sitting back. He's got his legs kicked up on they're sitting in the dinette area of the camper. And he's just hanging out, bullshitting about anything. They're not even talking about the camper. He's just he's just hanging out, having a good time with them. And so that was another thing that I learned. Those two things. And then probably the biggest thing that I learned that was costing me in my business up until that point, but I didn't know about it, because it was answering objections. And you kind of already talked about this, being okay, to be wrong or to be rejected, but being able to answer objections is the key. Because before that point, I was doing Google ads, I was selling, websites, I was, Facebook ads, whatever I could, anything internet marketing related that I understood how to do, I was doing it. And I'd hear this all the time before I was in the sales department. I'd be like, oh, Corey, yeah, Google ads don't work. And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, you're not a customer. Sorry to bother you. I didn't mean to wreck your day by bringing up Google ads.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And that would be and I'm like, oh, I guess he's not a customer. Well, the big light bulb at this point was the fact that it's answer the objections. Tell me more. Why do you think that Google ads is a scam? And then they'd be like, well, my cousin Bill had my nephew, he came over and one time he put some Google ads on there and like, he just, so basically he hired somebody that doesn't know anything about Google ads to run it. So that's why it failed, or maybe there's some other thing like, oh, I read an article on the interwebs where they said that, Google ads is, it's fake. It's not real. It's, whatever. And it's like, I learned that I need to ask questions because nobody wants to buy anything, right? They don't, they want to have a problem solved. So I would listen to this and then it'd be like, oh, okay, well, this is maybe why it didn't work out, but at least I gave myself a fighting chance. And it was so huge, like you can't properly sell without understanding how to answer those objections. So that was a huge one. And through this entire process,
actually, Corey, just before you go on to that, because you're hitting a super good point. Look, there's a lot of psychology that goes into this, right? Like all the stigma you said, that's going to live in us and it's going to, cause resistance. And so that's a whole separate subject. But the other thing is there's just this concept that sales is about being pushy and forcing, right? And you said two things. Sales is really about stories, your story, their story. Why are we even here, right? And the second thing is it's about questions and learning and curiosity, right? So as soon as, if we can do the two things you said, if we can believe in our product and service and its benefit and value, and we can start to be curious about the person we're speaking to experience and their problems, that is it. Like that is like, if those two things can be things you got to develop within yourself. But if you are passionate and deeply believe in the value your service or product is going to deliver, and you're willing to be curious about the other person and what they're experiencing and what, they could use this with, that takes all, because you're no longer forcing anything. You're just saying like, wow, this is what's going on with you. That's so interesting. And this is how this works and could solve this for you. And then it's just a matter of like, great, I have a solution. You have a problem. We want this to work. Now we're talking about price, right? And that's a different thing. But like, if that's the game of just how curious can I be? How much information can we share to see if there's a real alignment here, and approach things as like, how much can I learn versus how much can I get them down a track of buying? Like, I think that's a big reset.
Yeah. And those two things, the understanding the consistency and then also answering objections, I took those back to my business. I just came home to my wife one day and I'm like, you know what? I can't handle going there anymore because people would steal leads from me. Like I would bring them in on the internet and they'd come through the front door and they'd be like, well, if they don't say your name, I guess they're not your lead. You know what I mean? So after a couple more months of that, I'm like, all right, my wife's name's Carissa. Carissa, we're just gonna I'm gonna stop. And I'm going on the internet. I'm gonna start figuring out how to get more clients. And then I just, I developed a system and boom, 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 just like that, my business went right up. So that was a key thing. So the big takeaway with this is, and this is what I tell to everybody when they start telling me, like when they, they're marketing or sales guys or whatever. And I totally understand because I was there too. But I think the bottom line is like all sales and marketing are just, it's storytelling and tool making, right? Like, I mean, that I've always talked about this. We're all just storytellers and tool makers, right? And if you just look at it that way, it's totally changes everything, right? Because all you're doing is telling a story. You're trying to understand people. And then you're going to make tools, whatever, it doesn't have to be like a physical tool, but some kind of a tool to help them achieve, whatever, or solve a problem that they have. And that's really all you're doing is you're solving problems. And that's as old and as natural as humanity itself, right? I mean, going back to like, you know what, you're a caveman. It's like, hey man, don't walk over there because there's a tiger's going to eat you before you even get to the deer. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or here, take this spear with you that I figured out works for kill. You know what I'm saying? Like, so,
yeah,
and then on that note, to take it a step further, it's like, so you get the storyteller and the tool maker. Well, now it's like, you have to understand like that spear that you made, you can take that spear, which let's use that as like a representation of sales or marketing. The spear, you can take that spear and you can stab a deer, take it home, cook it up, and feed the whole village. Or you could take that spear and jam it through the back of your brother or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's just a tool. Sales and marketing are just tools. They're neither good nor bad. The people that are using those tools are the thing that are good or bad, right? So I mean that to me, I when I tell people that, or I usually use a knife, because everybody gets a knife in the back kind of thing. It's the same thing, right? You can use it to do all kinds of things that are helpful and that help solve problems, but you can also use them to hurt people and whatever. So it's that simple. It's like there should, and I think it helps dispel a little bit, because every time I've been using that for marketing forever, I'm like, I tell them the story about I can, clean a fish with the knife, or I can jab it in your back. It's just a tool. It's just the person that's using it. And that's all marketing and sales are. And it's like, I think if you can look at it that way, and like we said, have a belief in, how you can help and what you're selling or what you're talking about, those are the key components. And
yeah, I mean, for business owners in particular, it's like you started this business for a reason. You must believe in it one way or another. And if you're the business owner and you don't believe in it, that's okay. Just change it, adopt it, adapt. This is the way you did. You adopted and adapted your style, and I'm sure like how you delivered the service to match something like, okay, I can feel good about this. Like you're in total control, right? The other thing I'll say, Corey, about thinking about that too, we tend to put our own insecurities into the minds of someone else. So I've heard so many people say like, oh, they're gonna feel like it costs too much. They're gonna feel like that's too much to pay, or they're gonna feel like it's unaffordable. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, are you feeling insecure about like how much your product costs? Then that's for you to work out. You're not to decide what someone else can afford or how they feel about it. You can ask them. Sure. You can say, how does this feel? Does that feel manageable or whatever, to ask about their budget or what's comfortable for them. As long as you're asking and you're getting information, that's great. But to make assumptions and project how they're going to feel or how much they can afford or how meaningful this is to them, that's for them to decide. If you want to be real curious about it and find out, fine. But we make these assumptions like, oh, they can't afford that. How do you know what they can afford? And how do you know what they're willing to sacrifice to get a product or service that could really help their business or help their life or whatever it may be? So we tend to do that. And then it's also helpful, I find, like on the reverse of that. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll be like, oh, it's just like, it feels so bad when, people are selling and I don't want to be pushy and these things. And I'll ask them like, name me the last 10 things you bought. Did you feel like that? Like, it's very rare, actually. Like we might get those, 5 or 6 bad experiences over a year. But through the course of the day, we're constantly buying stuff. We're constantly interacting and exchanging in the trade of information. And we normally, genuinely, overall feel good about it, right? So it's like, where is this coming from? We're focusing on these isolated few experiences because they get magnified in our mind. That's what, like I told you, that negativity bias, it magnifies the snake versus the beautiful butterfly. And so we magnify these bad experiences and we're like terrified that we will give someone that bad experience. And it's like, no, those are actually more rare than not. And especially if you have good intentions and you have a good product and you believe it, then it helps to kind of reorient and think about your own experience and not try to put your insecurities in the head of somebody else. If you're wondering if they can afford it, ask them.
Sales, looking back on it, I think it's one of those skills that we'll call it a skill because a lot of people think it's like magically you're just a great salesman. And some people just are, not everybody's Michael Jordan in basketball, but everybody can play basketball,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? So I kind of look at it like that too, but it's a skill. And I feel like we should learn these things. This is almost should be a course in school, right? Because
Yes.
I think it helps with all engagements, no matter what you're doing, even with my kids. I think when I was learning sales and reading sales books, I was able to kind of move them, in different directions, little by little, just by understanding sales. I mean, it sounds crazy, but like, it's no different, trying to get somebody to buy a camper or trying to get them to, become my client for Google Ads, really at the core is about the same thing as trying to get, my daughter to eat her vegetables when she's like 5 years
Right,
old.
right,
You
yes.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's not.
that's why I said there's a lot of psychology involved to understand behavior, motivation, decision making. Like what is the core driver at the human level, and how we engage with people, how we develop trust, how we are assessing our needs, how we're making decisions. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of underlying motivators there that are interesting to learn.
It's personal development as well, because
Mhm.
you start to realize, especially at my age, and I don't want to sound like an old stogie or something like that, but like, your attention span, your energy levels, all that stuff start to wane a little bit more. So you have to, you have to build up resilience to stuff. You have to understand what your limitations are. You have to understand, how to keep a good energy level. You have to understand, how to, how you already spoke to this a little bit before, just your mentality, like, not having these doubts in your mind. I mean, this is stuff that's good for you. It's
Yeah.
not
There you
bad.
go.
And
There you go.
trying to understand how to become a better salesperson or how to become a better marketer, you have to understand other people and you have to understand yourself, right? So to me, there's no negative to it, because it's just going to help you all around. So it's just, I don't know. It just, that's what I tell people. I mean, some people can either take it or leave it or whatever, but that's kind of what I found for my own personal experience. So
Yeah. Yeah. And we can maybe share this, but I know you talk about it and post a lot about it. I did a very specific post on this where I was talking to a group of college kids. I live here in Davidson, North Carolina. We have Davidson College here. And they asked me, like, would you recommend a career in sales? And I said, absolutely. Like, especially as soon as possible, because I said sales is life skills. Like,
yeah,
forget about a career. I was like, maybe it's not the career for you, but if you do it for 2 years, if you learn how to cold call, cold email, just call that communication. That's the other thing. People get freaked out about cold calls and cold emails. I hate it too. It's like, it is an uncomfortable, unpleasant thing. Let's just be honest about it, right? Like, that is the one aspect where it is challenging, right? Because you got to do high volume and you're interrupting people. That's true, right? There's no point like sugarcoating it. But again, if you have something of value and you're doing it in the right intention, then it's fine. But just like you said, that example of the top RV salesman, he just kept calling people. Like, if you're willing to engage in conversation, you become good at the art of conversation. You feel comfortable talking to strangers. What a skill that is, right?
yeah,
And then you like to know people. You learn different perspectives. I'm so grateful for my career in sales, for all those things I learned, but so many connections I have through colleagues and customers and so many people I've talked to, and I get to hear their stories and I get to learn different cultures. Like, I ended up working around the world too. So it took me places, other careers can as well. But absolutely, like, I think just to sum it up, sales is life skills. Like, forget about career, but if you can learn that and get paid to learn it, just like you did, like, just genius what you did to go, like, I need to learn this and I'm going to make some money. I'm going to have someone, instead of me going taking a course, I'm going to go do it and I can get paid to do it. There's no better learning, right?
yeah. And, even with sales, like for these college kids, and this is the same, I could say the same thing to Gen X people our age or older. Um, Sales is also walking into a job interview or preparing for a job interview. Or in my case, I have a story like, and I can't remember if I said this on the last podcast, so I apologize if I'm like repeating myself. But when I started to understand sales a little more, I was also gaining more confidence. That's when I like went kind of over my boss's head and went straight to the straight to the owner and basically asked him for a raise. I didn't just say, hey, give me money. No, I put together, I knew what his
Yeah.
objections were going to be, and it's just like, and I laid them out and I answered those objections, so that kind of was a little more marketing because I did a little pre-planning. And that's kind of a side note too. You don't have to be, you don't have to be the salesperson calling up, cold calling people on the phone out of the blue. You can also understand marketing and have
Yes.
them start bringing people to you. So then the only part of sales is just like getting them over the line. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
moving them across the finish line. But that was just a huge thing. So yeah, if you just finding a job or getting a promotion doesn't even have to be a business situation, right? It's just sales is just, you're not going to regret understanding how to do it. So that's all. I mean,
Yes. And let's maybe dovetail into the marketing self-promotion arena, especially for Gen X, as you say, because there's a similar, maybe even bigger stigma and, let's just be honest, fear around that.
yeah.
But I also like how you're connecting it to job interviews, because it's all the same concept, right? Like being able to confidently speak about yourself and tell your stories and really emphasize the strengths and accomplishments is, sales and marketing of yourself. And so whether you're doing that for a job or for your business or product, that again, life skill is important. And, when it comes to job interviews, it's the same when you're in a sales conversation and the customer starts deep diving on some technical feature. Like you said, you didn't know the technical aspects of the RV and such, right? Like learning that stuff is always beneficial, but it's okay to not know and then focus on your strength. What do I do know? Like what, and questions like, how can I learn? You're trying to learn. Let me try to learn and go that back and forth. The same in the job interview. So often people right before the job interview, they get so worried about like all the things they don't know. They'll go through the job requirements, right? And list and go like, oh, I wasn't good at that. I'd never done that before. And they get focused on the things they don't know or aren't good at when they should be doing 80% on how do I nail this role? What are all the strengths I bring to this? And if there is that question on something you haven't done, you just own that and go like, well, that's going to be a learning and development thing, or I'll work with the team or whatever, right? But that's more that marketing, I think, of just like putting your story out there, putting your strengths out there and conveying that consistently versus like worrying about all the things you don't know or haven't done.
You bring up an interesting point with like, thinking that you have to know everything. That was a big one. That, and I can use
That
my
crushed me.
sales. Yeah, I can use my sales, but I can also take it back to like pre-sales. Like I remember when I was just starting out like in drafting school, this is like a long time ago, but it was like you didn't have to memorize every single technical manual out there to do something. You just had to know where to find it. And
Mhm.
it's like that is like a key thing, right? So if you're in a job interview, you're in a sales call, and I've had this happen a lot of times, both in interviews over the years and trying to convince a client that, they should be my client, where it's like, well, hey, what about X? Do you know about this or do about that? And be like, I don't lie. Don't ever lie and say that you do and then
Mhm.
just pretend you do.
Right.
Just
Oh, that's
say,
a surefire way to be anxious.
yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to look it up like the second we get off this call or whatever. You know what I mean? I think that's gained, or that's served me so much better. Just letting them know, like, you just be honest with them, because honestly, honesty is like, it really is the best policy. Just be, if you know, if you don't, you don't. Just be honest about it, because that trust right there is bigger than anything else that's happening in
Nailed
any
it.
conversation. You wipe that trust out and you're screwed, right? But at least if you're honest, even if you don't know something, you're better. And that was a big thing that I learned when I was a draftsman, right? I was just like, well, I'm not going to have to memorize all these manuals, but I do know where to go look. There was manuals for everything. And then the internet came along, and then I really went nuts, because then I could
Yeah.
I could always learn something. And
There you go. So you got these good little threads to connect. So being constantly worried about trying to know everything, that's just anxiety feeling. Like that is something that sales and running your own business will throw in your face constantly. So that has been a major thing major hurdle, a major source of anxiety for me that I've had to overcome. It's so much easier when you're just like, there's no way to know everything. Whatever I know in this conversation is what I know. Trying to search my brain rack and pretend, like you said, it caused so much anxiety for me. So when I learned to just accept where I'm at and know what I know in this conversation, that settled, made me a lot more calm, which made me more trustworthy, right? It was like so much better. And then also, then it was like, okay, that doesn't mean I like what I didn't know from this conversation we're having. Like, as you're sparking stuff, then the key is to go learn it. It's not to like stay where you're at. It's like, man, that customer, that client, that person, that job interviewer, whatever, they asked me like these three really good questions. I had no idea. And that would be really useful for me to understand. Let me go dive into it. And then you get better for the next one, and so on and so forth. And now, Corey, we're talking about being lifelong learners, which, pursuing new jobs and pursuing your own business or running something of your own is going to force you to do, especially if you want to be successful at it.
And I think I keep using stigma. I'm just not having a good, not doing really well at pulling in new terms today, but I think you go back to school. It's like, why are we so hung up on having to memorize everything? That's basically what school was. It's like, you got to memorize all this stuff for the test. You have to memorize all this stuff for the quiz. It's like, that's what we were brought up to think learning is, right? And yes, it is that, but once the internet came along, it's like, you realize you don't have to memorize anything. You had to figure out how to find stuff and how to put ideas together. You don't have to like know absolutely everything. I mean, sure, it's handy, like, I know, because it's just, remember, like when we were younger, we had to go to the library, dig out a card. Hopefully there was a book there even on the topic that you're talking about. Like, so you had, knowledge was precious, right? Like you only had a limited amount of it, and it wasn't easy to get. So you kind of had to memorize it, because otherwise, not everybody could afford to have a library at their house. You know what I mean? So I'm not blaming the education system or anything like that. It's just kind of the way that we evolved. But that's the way it was when we were younger. You had to memorize stuff. We don't have to memorize anything necessarily anymore, right? I mean, except for lyrics if you're a singer-songwriter. But because otherwise you look stupid if you got the words in front of you. But I think you know what I'm saying. Like, you don't.
I do. Well, and I think it's really, really
memorization.
important. You're saying really important stuff here, Corey, because again, I don't know. I'm always picking up two things you're doing. So like, one, you're talking about the education system and memorization, right? And how that was like how we were judged, how we were scored, like how well we could remember things. And like, I know, like there was times of like embarrassment when the teacher calls on you something, you don't know the answer, or you'd get a bad grade on the test. And that lives with us. We're constantly filtering through our experience of the past, right? And so that's all there. It's worth recognizing and acknowledging, right? So that we can kind of update and go, all right, well, the world has evolved, as you said, but we need to evolve our thinking and how our system is responding to the current world, and not just from our past experiences, right? It's a whole process. But the other thing you said I love was like, oftentimes, like I hear it so much, like, oh, our education is trying to industrialize us and blah, blah, and it's like, and we're blaming. It's like, it is what it is. There's no point, that was the style of education we got. Okay. It's our job now to update ourselves to match the modern world and match who we want to be and how we want to operate, and using the tools we have access to, right? But to be constantly like, oh, it's because they didn't teach me this and teach me that. Okay, that is what it is. How are you going to go forward? How are you going to update that? That's our job to do.
Yeah, in this, again, I'm speaking from personal experience on this. So anybody out there that thinks I'm calling them out or anything, like, I'm not calling them out. I'm calling my old self out, because it's basically a lack of accountability is the reason why, and trust me, I've ripped on the education system many times. I probably still do once in a while, but now that I know, guess what? It's up to me to kind of change course or to rectify it. It's like, I can sit there and cry all day about like not getting this or getting that in my past, but ultimately that has nothing to do with today and tomorrow, so I think you just have to be ready to move on. It's like, great, I just learned a lesson, that's huge, now I'll move it on. And by the way, I'll mention it to my kids, or anybody else that wants to learn, I'll pass that information on. But yeah, you can't sit there and dwell. And I think I spent a lot of my younger life, up until probably my mid to late 20s, where it was always someone else's problem, or it's like I was a victim of something. I was always such a pessimist, And
Corey, thank you for saying that. And you're lucky, because I'm 45. I only really come to that realization in the last few years. So I spent much longer time in that victim mentality, blaming people, blaming circumstances, and it does something. It makes us feel better for sure. I was like, oh, that's not my fault, right? Oh, that's this and that. And that like little reprieve, that little dopamine hit makes you feel better about yourself in that moment. But long term, it's just a game you're never going to win. And that's another thing that, going out on my own. So I will say this, like whether it's sales or whether it's, running your own business or leading a big team, something where you have like the ultimate responsibility, that is the greatest life lessons. Because what happened was I was blaming, companies and the way they were run, all this stuff. And then I ran my own business. I worked for myself. I'm like, oh, it's me, and that's like a hard realization. It was hard, man. It was hard. Like we often resist and try to fight that. It's just easier to blame someone else until we come to the realization, same as you did, that like, man, when I have that accountability, that's empowering actually, because even though it's hard, even though I wish I had learned different things or whatever, I didn't. And that's okay. And now I get to, and now that's like really empowering when it's like, this is all up to me. I can blame stuff, or I can just go, that's the way it is, and I'm going to do something about it. And that builds real confidence, and that builds up, your momentum versus getting stuck and just looping.
And just to kind of bring it somewhat full circle, I think about all the stuff I used to be pissy about when I worked, when I was talking about like dealing with the sales guys and dealing with people in the company. Because when you're a draftsman, you work with everybody because, you have to order the part, you have to get it through the warehouse, you have to get it through every department, you have to talk to HR, everybody's involved, shipping, warehouse, assembly, everything. You work with so many people, and there were so many complaints I had. But yes, once I became my own business owner, once I understood the sales stuff, I understood the sales guys. I'm like, oh, well, that's why they were doing what they were doing, and it's like, I wish I would have known that before, or I started to appreciate people that like how they were. There was this smooth talker that was always like, I don't know, I don't know, explain him, but it always would drive me nuts. He would like mesmerize me. Like I'd be like, what the hell? Like, and you'd be in a meeting and you'd be like, all right, we're going to do it. And then you go out of the meeting, you're like, wait, that's not going to work. What the hell? Why did I agree to that? Like he was one of those type of dudes. But I learned I used to be pissed about him all the time. But like when I started understanding my own business stuff, it was just like, oh, well, that was kind of on me for just not understanding that. Right. So to bring it full circle, yes, I think, there's so many things you're going to learn with your own business, and that all comes with, personal development. That comes with like a lot of the books that I read. And I think kind of to just start ramping this down a little bit, and kind of, I think since this is our second test, our test run, I feel like we need to give everybody a takeaway, a call to action, something that they can do to become better at sales, to become more accountable. And I think maybe we'll just do sales or something like that. I mean, what are some books or some resources that you think somebody can, look into, that can help them kind of get better at that, whether it's their career or their business?
The first thing I would do, Corey, is do a self-assessment, right? And just ask yourself a few questions of like, what am I believing? That's the number. Like, what am I believing about myself, about my product or service, and about my customer? And literally just do some sort of journaling, just write that down, like, because really get that self-awareness. Because if there's resistance, if there's not making progress, and set, like, to even attempt to go. So the reason I'm saying that as the first step is because there's great books out there. There's going to be different styles of things for different people. But the thing that is going to be the most important is understanding, if I'm just resistant, if I just think sales is bad, if I think salespeople are bad and sales is bad and it's sleazy, then even if you go and read a book, it's unlikely you're going to really put it in practice, and put it in practice with earnest, because you're going to not want to be this sleazy person doing these, scammy tasks. So the first thing you got to do is really understand, what am I believing about sales? What am I believing about myself and my capability and my ability to sell? What am I believing about my product and service and its value and its ability to help people or solve a problem? And what am I believing about my customers? Can they afford it? Do they want it? Is it going to help them? Am I going to find the people that really need this and will get value from it? So if you get that as a starting point, 3 simple questions about what you're believing, really dive into that to understand, man, I really have a negative belief and connotation towards sales. If you held that in yourself, it's going to be really hard to get great at sales because you're going to constantly be internally resisting it and avoiding it. So I would definitely start there.
Yeah, that's definitely a starting point. I always kind of think about like throwing myself in the fire somehow. Like, how can I throw myself in the fire? Because I can think about it, and I am awful at doing this. I overthink the hell out of everything. I'm a chronic overthinker. And I think when I do best, it's like when I throw myself in a situation where I have to get better, or it forces me to get into a position where I have to seek an answer. You know what I mean? And it's like, I understand what you're saying. I also think too, like if you start a business, or you target some sort of a goal and then you throw yourself into it, because you're going to put yourself in. It's kind of like when I was talking on the last show, like when I would just book shows because I knew I had to go to the show. I wouldn't have put the work in as a musician or a singer-songwriter.
Yeah. Yes.
I wouldn't have practiced as much. But when I knew that there was a show on the schedule, guess what? I'm practicing every day. I'm looking for ways to get better. So I would think like if you're more business minded, or you're like thinking about a side hustle, I would say just start, just get something going. And then you'll start to see things kind of pop up. Just to throw some books out there. It's a super old book, but it was one that was kind of interesting to me that like kind of turned a few things, was like How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's like, yeah, this is kind of like, 101. Like, I feel like everybody's always recommended this book for eons, but I think there's a lot of good takeaways, and I think it's pretty timeless advice. And I think it kind of gets you moving. It's an older book, but it's pretty, I think it stands the test of time. And I'm like I know there's a million other people I could probably think about, but I think if you start like there, I'm trying to think of some other ones.
Well, the one that stands out for me, it's not exactly about sales, but it is a lot about psychology. I mean, so the book is called Getting to Yes. And the reason I'm bringing that one up is, one, because it's quite short, but like really impactful. So it's just kind of like really direct into how to approach. It's specifically about negotiations, which is only one fractional part of sales, but it is a lot about that psychology of the dynamic between two parties, and it's understanding what a negotiation is. And it's super helpful, again, in job interviews, because these things are all negotiations, right? It's all about give and take. It's about learning what that person's motivators are and where you can find middle grounds. And so it's that same concept of like that communication style and learning about the psychology of trading information and trading services. So that one has always stood out to me as just like really understanding what is your driver? What is it like? Where are we apart and where can we meet in the middle? And it was just really helpful for me. Yes, for negotiation, but also just that better understanding of people and dynamics. So, and it's an old book as well, right? I think there's something to that, right? So maybe we can link to a few more modern takes, but that one was definitely impactful for me.
Or just join an MLM and just have something to try selling all your friends something. That'll teach you. that'll give you a baptism by fire there. But yeah, no, I'm kind of half joking about that. But yeah, just having something to sell, having a project to work on where you have to, exchange value of some sort, or like I said, even with your kids or your family or your wife or whatever it is, your husband, that you want to persuade them to do something that's in their best interest or in both of your best interests. So those are good places to kind of start thinking about it and trying to get better at that. So I don't know.
Look, it's silly not to mention it, Corey. Like that is a great example, actually. Now, whether you want to do an MLM or whatever, like,
yeah, I'm half joking. You probably don't want to.
I understand, but the premise is there. So the other thing is, use these tools, right? Like get onto an AI and start to like let it know this is the stuff I'm interested in. This is the type of product or service. Like if you haven't built it yet, but you're wanting to build momentum into actually launching something, a side hustle, a new business, whatever, let it know, like, this is what I'm thinking, and then let it get recommendations on resources and ways to start. Like, could I go, start, selling or promoting, this type of product or service for someone else to get started, to learn the ropes, kind of like you did with the RVs and such. But there's so many ways to just like dip your toe. But you're absolutely right. This is what I'm saying about understanding your beliefs, understanding what internal resistance you might have, because none of this matters. We can give the best books in the world. I've been through this. I've read dozens of books on a particular subject and never took action on them. Yeah. So I was knowledgeable about them. I could have a conversation like this about them, but if I didn't go practice them, if I didn't go do them, I never got better. I never even started. So you're absolutely right. Whatever it is, you can find a small stepping stone, dip your toe, even if that means going to do an unrelated job or task to sell some other product. Go help a nonprofit sell, tickets to a dinner, whatever, right? Any of that kind of stuff. Any way you can get started to get over that hump will be useful.
You're not going to learn how to swim by not jumping in the water. You can read about swimming all day long, but until you jump in there and start doing the deed. So yeah. And you actually surprised me there, because I'm like, why didn't I think of AI? How the hell is that even possible right now? I've been like, so everything is AI. I'm on there all the time. I'm like asking it questions. It's like, yeah, what, don't even go get the book, How to Win Friends and Influence. Just go ask ChatGPT. Hey, are you familiar with the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People? And it will just like, yes, I am. It's out there, and you could just use it as a study guide and just kind of walk you through it. It'll give you the principles. So there you go. That's even better than the book, maybe.
The best prompt though, Corey, though, for yourself and for the AI is like, how do I get started? How do I put this in practice? If we just consume knowledge and we don't get over our insecurity, our fears, our beliefs, whatever, to like take an action, it won't matter. So prompt yourself, again, that self-query, that self-assessment. What is preventing me from getting started, or how can I get started? You can ask yourself that, and just whatever idea comes to mind, some small action, but ask AI too, like, what's a great way to learn this? What's a great way to get started? Is there ways I could get paid to learn this? Like, what are creative ideas? Like I said, engage with a nonprofit, do something that makes you feel good. It's a good cause or whatever, but you got to get engaged. You got to take action. So that's an important question too. How do I get started?
All right. Well, let's put a bow on this puppy, and maybe just finish maybe with, tell us one more time where we can find you. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yep. Mike, my company is MindWorks. You can get to the website at mymindworks.com. It is mind, WORX.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Buccialia. That might be tricky, but it's BUCCIALIA.
Cool. And I'm Corey Koehler. You probably don't want to Google my name because you're just going to get confused, because there's so many things laying around out there. I do a lot of stuff. And but if you want this type of conversation or this type of content, go to redefiningretirement.io. You'll get it when you get there. If you the tagline will pretty much lay it out for you, what's going to happen over there. Also, this YouTube channel, I just named it myself, Corey Koehler, and then I just put Redefining Retirement. There might be another Redefining Retirement out there. Mine's like at Redefining Retirement X. That's what it is. But if you're watching this on YouTube, you probably already know that already. But yeah, other than that, I think we'll wrap this one up. I don't know what we had on the list for next time. I think we had some interesting conversations. So,
I think we didn't even really fully get into, we kept it primarily on sales, little hints at marketing, but I think this idea of self-promotion, what that means in terms of posting videos, newsletters, a lot of the things you and I are doing. I know it was incredibly scary and challenging for me to get started on that stuff, because of all this, old stuff that, you see your parents or your friends or whatever, making fun of him, mocking people, like, what are they doing? Who do they think they are, putting themselves doing that, right? And it's like, man, that lives in you. There's kind of this voice that like stays in there, kind of like saying that stuff to you about you, and it can be really not only detrimental, but also preventing from moving forward. So I think it's we could definitely get an hour on that topic, and people want to figure out how to move forward on that.
That's a deep one. I have some brutal friends. I love them, but man, they were they were messing with me pretty hardcore back when I first started doing this stuff. Yeah, and we forgot to touch on imposter syndrome, but that's another one. So we're just going to keep rolling with it. I mean, I'm sure we have all kinds of stuff to talk about. It'll just kind of keep seeping out of our brains for the next however long we do this, and we'll figure it out. So, all right.
Good stuff,
Thanks
Corey.
again, Mike. Have a good rest of the day, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Take care, everybody.